Hey guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we have a very important and educational video that we are filming.
Online it says dissociative identity disorder, so DID, is formally referred as a multiple personality disorder.
So that's what it used to be called.
Yeah.
People, if you usually say to people that someone has dissociative identity disorder, they usually don't know what it is. But if you say they have multiple personality disorder, although they don't really know what it is, they would have at least heard of it.
Yeah, so it's a common wherein a person's identity is fragmented into two or more distinct personality states. People with this rare condition are often victims of severe abuse.
We just want to put a disclaimer here that we mean no harm or any offence by making this video. Sally has agreed to do this video, and obviously we are just doing it for educational purposes. It's not just for entertainment purposes. We want people to understand what the disorder is, and we want to try and break the stigma.
We are now joined with Sally over on Skype. Hi Sally.
Hi everyone! So I'm Sally and I suffer with DID, and I'm happy to be joining Caitlin and Leah today, and hopefully we're going to get some questions answered for you guys about the disorder and talk about it.
So Sally, we've just explained what DID is from what's the definition on the internet. Would you be able to explain what DID means to you?
Okay, so DID is about having different alters, as they're called, and we'll talk about that a bit later more, but it's about where your brain splits off into different personalities and you have different parts within yourself. And those parts are made deliberately by your brain to help you cope with some severe trauma that's happening in your life. So that's what it is for me.
So you just spoke to us about alters. Could you please explain what alters are and what alters you have?
Alter is where your brain splits off and creates a new personality. So to join the two questions together, so I'm Sally and I'm 32. I have 4 key alters. I have Scarlett, who's 15. I have Star, who's 10. Charlotte, who's 6. And Poppy, who is 4. Now, they're called alters because they're not real people, but they are, in a sense, real personalities. So they all have their own way of thinking, their own way of portraying themselves, their own way of acting.
So do you feel yourself physically changing when your alters come? Or is it just, I don't know.
It's not really a physical change. Sometimes they come almost unexpectedly. So I might hear my voice start to change slightly. So I might start a sentence in my voice as Sally, and then it might suddenly change and go a little bit higher and a little bit cuter, because then you've got Poppy, who is 4, who will start to talk, and then I know that one of them is there and they're with me and they're gonna start to come out.
You know, you said you have 4 alters, core alters. How do they communicate, and do they communicate with each other?
Is it like a constant dialogue in your head, or is it more like you're all in a waiting room and you can see each other and communicate with each other? Because that's what I've heard some people say.
That too.
It kind of is like a waiting room. So you can't see them. So I can't see the alters all the time. So I don't have images in my head of all of them at all. But there is like a constant dialogue. So basically, literally, whatever happens in my world, so even if something randomly falls off a shelf in my apartment, there'll be a reaction in my head from everybody. So I may feel that reaction as an emotion, or I might hear a sentence, almost not an audible sentence, but I'll like almost feel the sentence inside. So I kind of like feel Poppy say, "Something fell over," or just something like that, and it would just be a really simplistic response. And then I'll have my own response that says, "Oh my goodness, something just fell off the shelf. What was that?" And it's quite different.
That is really, really interesting. I don't know if I can ask, but is it happening now as we speak? Like, are your alters coming through and saying all different stuff as we're speaking? Because talking to you now, it feels like I'm just talking to Sally. So that's really interesting.
Yes. They are. I had Poppy earlier. So Poppy, who I've said is 4, she said, because I got shown your cat just a minute ago, and so I heard Poppy say, "It's really fluffy," and oh, look at the little kitty. And so I had her talking about the cat that we'd just seen, that you got to show me. And I've had Star, who is 10, saying, there's another camera, because I'm recording myself as well. So there's another camera, and she's like, I'm being recorded twice. And somebody just said my name. Why is she talking about me? And I have Charlotte, who is very much liking all of this, because Charlotte's quite outgoing and likes talking. And so she's very much kind of liking what's happening right now. So she's like, they're talking to me, I'm having attention. And so she feels kind of like the center of attention, which she really likes. So it's kind of really liking to her. Scarlett isn't really paying attention to any of this at the moment. So I don't really know what she's thinking.
So what age were you diagnosed with DID?
I was actually diagnosed at 28. Now, that might seem quite old, because obviously the alters were formed when I was about 2 or 3, or they started being formed when I was 2 and 3. And then they formed gradually throughout my life up until I was 10. And then they were kind of all of them had been formed. But I wasn't diagnosed until I was 28. And I had no idea that I had alters. I had no idea that they existed. I didn't know that they were influencing my behaviour. Obviously, I knew that I was a very upset and very disturbed and very challenged, like, teenager and my early 20s. I was really struggling with life.
That must be also difficult for your family and friends. Like, do they change their behaviour with what alter they're with, or? In
regards to family, my family really don't understand DID. So I have 3 siblings. They're all older than me, and they're all married and all have children. I actually don't have communication with 2. So my 2 elder brothers, they don't talk to me at all. They're very much against mental health in general. So ever since I have been unwell, which is obviously for a very long time, they basically disowned me. So my brothers don't have anything to do with me. My sister has become more understanding and tries to understand, but they've really not wanted to grasp.
We're really sorry to hear that, but obviously it's very good that you have friends and people around you that understand and are there to support you.
And together we hope that this video would just show that mental health is so important and it should not be dismissed and it should be spoken about, and that is what we're doing. So hopefully somehow, somewhere, your brother might see this and it will maybe change his mind.
The trauma that happened to me when I was a child was so severe and so extreme that when DID is formed, it does come it is formed because of a severe traumatic experience. It's usually enduring, so it's over a long period of time, usually throughout the formative years, so from childhood up to kind of like pre-teens. That's very, very common, and that's when DID is formed. But the actual host doesn't learn about the alters or know about them until the alters realise that the host is ready to. So that's a really interesting kind of fact. So the alters themselves kind of understand the host's kind of emotional ability and intellectual ability. So the alters understood that me at 21 could not have coped with knowing what happened to me when I was a child. So they had to wait. So they waited and waited and waited. And when I was 28 and we had found our therapist now, who we still see, who is really on the ball and they all trust and they've all spoken to her and they realised she really was the right person. Obviously we'd seen other therapists and they hadn't come out, but I wasn't ready to know the information and they knew that. So when we saw Joanna, who's our therapist now, the alters then decided, okay, she's ready to learn. She's ready to know what happened to her. So they will do that, and they will start to come out and talk. And yeah, so that's why diagnosis is often much later in somebody's life, because the alters need to know that the host is ready to learn what happened to them when they're a child, because it is usually very extreme and distressing. And they need to realise, and they need to understand and really believe that the host is not going to do something stupid like suicide or anything dramatic, purely just from learning what happened to them as a child, because it's obviously a very distressing thing for somebody to then learn.
Thank you so much for all that information about your alters. It was really, really interesting and insightful. We're now going to talk about assumptions versus reality.
Yeah, because the way that DID is presented in the media, and especially in films, they kind of make out as if the people with the disorder are aggressive and evil, yeah, and like as if they're serial killers, or sometimes they relate it to schizophrenia and psychosis,
PTSD.
Yeah, lots of different things. But obviously we don't believe that. We know that it's obviously completely different to any of those things, but we're just interested if you could maybe say what the reality is and kind of like try and debunk the assumptions.
So we actually saw Split, the film.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago, and it portrayed the disorder in such a bad light. It was about...
Called, is it a beast, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it was about this man. He kidnaps these 3 girls, takes them hostage, and then they realise that he has alters and changes into different people, and then starts warning them that the beast is coming, which is obviously one of the alters, but it kind of associates it with the devil and makes out that the people are really bad.
And that he only did bad things when these alters come in. But obviously from speaking to Sally, her alters are nothing like that.
It's a defence mechanism. It's not something that's evil or created by the person because they're a horrible person. It's something that happens to people, that horrible things have happened to these people, and that's why.
It's literally like a survival. It's there to, from what I've learned from Sally, it keeps you alive. It's when your brain can't cope with something, so it turns into something else. And I've got Sally on the screen right now saying, yes, you've got it right. So we're learning as well, and it's just hearing from Sally ourselves, it's so frustrating, even more seeing videos like that.
Yeah, it's just terrible that in the media and in films and stuff like that, they just represent it as such a bad thing. Like if it was something like cancer, for example, a physical illness that is very common, that if someone portrayed cancer in a bad light, people would go crazy.
And
they'd
not
be
only
so
that,
annoyed.
You can get like a bad alter that maybe does negative stuff, but let's say with a cancer, it's like one side effect of cancer is you might be irritable, but you don't just keep going on about that irritable side effect, do you?
No.
You don't.
It's not the person's fault that someone has it's not the person that has cancer's fault that they have cancer, just like it's not the person's fault that they have DID or any sort of mental disorder.
DID is portrayed really badly in the media, and that movie especially is one that I haven't seen, and by the sounds of it, it's not something I'd like to see, because it's really not like that. And what Leah said about how an alter can do, or I think both of you mentioned about how sometimes an alter might do something bad, and in a sense they do. So there are alters that maybe do something that's not maybe great, but like you said, there are symptoms of other things, physical illnesses, that cause people to be like, irritable or stressed or explode in anger at something. And alters are the same. They're just people, but they're not about to go and kill someone. And there was something that when Leah said that I agreed with what she was saying, is because she mentioned the word survival. And if there is one thing that is absolutely key, it's knowing that DID is a survival mechanism.
So that must be really conflicting then when it comes to therapy, because you're essentially trying to get rid of something that has kept you alive for so long. So how do you feel about that?
It's exactly that. It's getting rid of basically your survival method. But I am now 32, and although they kept me alive throughout the trauma, and they kept me alive throughout my teens, somehow, not very well. They didn't do the greatest of jobs, I've got to say, but we made it, and we made it through our teens and my 20s, and I'm now 32, and obviously I was diagnosed at 28, and it is difficult to think, and at first, in a sense, we talk about, then we're going to talk about therapy in a minute, so we're going to move on to therapy and how therapy works, and so we're going to talk about integration. And the idea of kind of DID not being part of my world anymore is almost kind of like inconceivable, because I really do sometimes ask myself the same question. It's like, why do I want to get rid of something that's kept me alive for so long? But realistically, they did keep me alive for this long, but actually I'm not able to live a normal life. So although I can do day-to-day things, I'm not well enough to go and have a job. I'm not well enough to work. I'm not well enough to have a boyfriend and get married and have children, because I might be talking to a guy and one of the alters will kick in and suddenly they're talking to a 4-year-old. It's not going to work. So realistically, although they served a purpose, and they serve a purpose for the host, their purpose needs to come to an end. And in time, in therapy, their purpose does come to an end, and that's when integration happens.
So you've just mentioned integration. Would you be able to explain the therapy process of DID and what sort of work you do?
Basically, like when you're starting out like really in the early stages of therapy, you kind of have to go through the process, and it's quite a long process. The average time to, in a sense, recover from DID is 7 to 10 years. And that might seem quite shocking, but it is. It's sadly true. And it's because the process is really quite demanding. So basically, it starts off as, so when I was first diagnosed, the alters obviously started to talk. And so they started to talk to my therapist. And when they were talking, I couldn't hear what they were saying. I couldn't see what I was doing. I didn't know what happened. So time passed and I didn't know. Then as we moved along, my therapist would start to tell me little bits of information about my story. So she'd start to tell me little things that the alters had said. So I'd get a little bit of understanding, like almost drip feeding information about my story. And then the alters become what I explained earlier about being co-conscious, and I can hear what they're saying. So then we go through the process of me, the host, finding out the facts of everything that went on. But that's purely intellectual. So I know the facts. So just the facts. So there's no emotion. So it's basically, I would think to myself, that happened, but it happened to Star. Or that happened and that happened to Poppy. And that happened and that happened to Charlotte. It didn't happen to me. So I don't equate it to myself. So then you go from that to then the alters being able to pass over emotion. Now, that's when you hit a really critical point. So, I mean, both of those things are critical. So the passing over of the facts usually takes quite a long time. It's taken us about 3.5 years of them passing over all the facts, and for me to accept those on a factual level. And now in the last year, we've hit the point where they start to pass over emotion. Passing over emotion is much harder, and almost like it is seriously like a bomb exploding in your head. It's like it's waiting, and then suddenly it goes boom, and suddenly I can feel the emotion of how the alter, who is me, felt when something was being done to me when I was a child. And as you can imagine, the severity of what happened, it was very extreme, and I could feel those things as if they were happening now. So at 32 and 31, as I've only just turned 32, I was basically feeling things that happened to me when I was 3, when I was 6 and 7, and my body felt the pain that went with that as well. So not only did I feel the emotion that I felt and I should have felt properly as a 6 and 4-year-old, but I felt the physical pain and the physical side of it as well. And that's a really hard thing to go through and a really hard process. So after you kind of go through that process of the emotional download and the host is feeling the physical effect of what they really should have felt when they were a child, but obviously a child can't cope with that extreme physical pain, so an alter does it for them. So when you feel it as an adult, it's just painful and you kind of have to relive pretty much everything, and it's horrible, and that in itself is probably the biggest chunk of therapy, and that takes a really long time. Now, the alters aren't going to need to download every single situation that they were put in, because we'd be here till I was dead if that was the case. But there will be certain key emotions or certain events that happened that they will need the host, which is me, to know and to feel and to properly kind of digest and process, really process. And once the alter, so let's say Star, who's 10, once Star has kind of got out the key parts of what she went through, the key emotional aspects, and given them to me, and I have felt them, and she feels like I've processed them and I understand and I've really kind of dealt with it and moved on, her role is then, basically, her role is done. And she's succeeded in doing what she was set out to do. So she kept me alive. She then gave me back the emotion. She got me through, and I got myself through feeling it. So then she can integrate and become part of me. And then basically that's what happens with all of the alters over time. They will all get to the point where they will have done enough emotional downloading to me, and they'll feel happy enough that their role is finished, so that they can finally say, okay, we can go now. And it's not like they just disappear, but they just become part of me. So instead of me being Sally and then suddenly being Charlotte or Poppy or Star or Scarlett, I'm just Sally, and just Sally with normal things that everybody thinks, and the kind of normal conversations like I explained about the shoes. I will just have normal inner dialogue rather than having the full-on separate personalities.
You mentioned your therapist, Joanna. Do you see Joanna with the NHS or private? What's the sort of therapy you get with her? Can you tell us a bit more?
So I don't actually receive any help from the NHS at all, and I never have done. I was obviously diagnosed by the NHS, and through the NHS psychiatric system and mental health system, they gave me the formal NHS diagnosis of DID, but my help and therapy has come from Joanna.
So could you explain why the NHS don't fund it, why they don't have any treatments for you, why they don't do anything for people with DID?
Yeah, so sadly the NHS is really behind on basically understanding DID and helping DID. There was, up until basically the beginning of December in 2018, so just gone, there was one unit that dealt with DID and eating disorders. Because obviously I've explained that I have eating disorders as well, it makes it even more complicated. So not only do I have DID, but I have 5 eating disorders. So if you go to a clinic, so a psychiatric ward will look at me and they say, she's got DID, that's one reason we can't treat her, because we've not heard of that, or we don't get taught that in school. So basically medical students, mental health nurses have never been taught or learn about DID.
It's just so frustrating because you see all of this money being put into, for example, footballers' wages.
Millions of pounds.
Yeah, literally, they're just like kicking a ball around, and then all the money that goes into MPs' wages and politicians and
singers.
They're just paid so much money. But if this money that was going to these people that really I don't see why that they should have that amount of money. If they put that towards research and help and important things, then they could change things so much, couldn't they? So
absolutely, it's ridiculous that someone
so bad
that someone has to go private just to get help for something. It's ridiculous. So Sally, the next question is, and I want this to be quite an important one, is what help would you like to see for people and yourself with DID for the future? What would you like to change?
I guess honestly, the first and primary thing that really needs to change is that people need to be educated. So those medical students who are in university right now, they need to be told in their mental health module about DID. They get told about schizophrenia, they get told about depression and anxiety, eating disorders, OCD, bipolar, PTSD, so many things. We need to add DID into that. That is the number one thing. And secondly, I think one of the main things that really needs to change is that they need to actually realise that whilst all these other countries have put effort and done this research and put the effort into actually trying to understand this illness and work out how to help people with this illness, the research has already been done. The UK just needs to say, okay, we're going to listen to them and we're going to act on what they've done, because they do it for other things. They'll do it for physical illness. So I want them to do it for DID. I want the NHS to look at the research that has been done by South Africa, by Australia, by the United States, and say, I'm looking at that research and realising that actually what we need to do is provide the therapy that is right. And that therapy may be long term and it might cost us a lot, but we need to put money into this because it's something that's serious.
Thank you so much, Sally, for talking to us and giving us so much insight into the disorder.
And your life.
Yeah, we really, really appreciate it. And we really hope that this educates others and even helps others that have the disorder, because we just want to spread awareness, stop the stigma, and just try and help as much as we can.
If it helps or educates one person, we've done a good job, because
we'll be really grateful and really happy that it's helped someone.
But you're amazing, Sally, and thank you so much. Never forget how strong you are.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to us. Bye.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate actually being given the opportunity, and it's actually an honour and a privilege to be able to talk to you girls and anyone who's watching. I want to say thank you for listening and to just hearing my story and knowing that it's not just my story, but it's actually quite a few people's stories. This needs to change, and together we can make it change. So I thank you for giving me the time to be able to speak out. And I truly hope that this video goes viral and we get this word out and we tell people that we are not serial killers. We're just normal people who have ordinary lives, and we're doing the best we can. And I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk about it and explain it and hopefully educate people today on basically DID.